When my son didn't invite me to his wedding, I didn't shout. I didn't call him, or send a message asking why. I just sat on the porch that evening, watching the last bit of sunlight fade over the quiet neighborhood, and I smiled a little, not because I wasn't hurt, but because life had finally shown me the cost of my own silence. You see, when you raise a child, you imagine he'll grow into someone who remembers your hands, the ones that built his world when he had none. But sometimes, children forget. Sometimes, pride grows faster than love. Ethan was my only son. And when I found out, not from him, but from a Facebook post, that he was getting married that weekend, my heart cracked like dry wood. There he stood in the photo, hand in hand with a woman I'd met only once, smiling wide under strings of lights. The caption read, "The countdown begins." I stared at it for a long time. My hands trembled, but not from anger, from memory. Because I remembered when those same hands had held mine, scared on his first day of school. When he'd whispered, "Don't let go, Dad." And I hadn't. Not until he forced me to. That night, I poured myself a glass of whiskey and said quietly to the empty room, "So this is how it ends, a father erased by pride." But as I sat there, an odd peace came over me. Because deep down, I knew, silence can cut deeper than any word. And when the day came, I'd show him what that truly meant. Ethan grew up in a small town in Oregon, where winters were long and honest work still meant something. I ran a small carpentry shop. Nothing fancy, just solid wood, sweat, and years of patience. I wasn't rich, but I built our home with my own hands. His mother, Linda, taught at the elementary school. She had a laugh that could stop a fight, and a way of turning even a hard day into something you could live through. We raised Ethan to be kind. At least we tried. But kindness doesn't always survive ambition. He was bright, sharper than I ever was. Got a scholarship, moved to the city, started climbing the corporate ladder before he even learned to slow down. I was proud. Every call from him felt like a small medal pinned on my heart. Then came the girl, Rebecca. Polite smile, city manners, but eyes that measured everything. She visited once, back when Ethan was still introducing her as my friend. She looked around my house, the uneven floors, the smell of sawdust, and said, "It's rustic." I knew what that meant. I just nodded and said, "Built it myself." Ethan laughed nervously and changed the subject. After that visit, calls grew fewer. Then came months of silence. When I finally reached out, he said, "Dad, Rebecca thinks, maybe it's better if we keep some distance. She says you judge her." Judge her? I hadn't said a word. I'd only watched her take pictures of my house like it was something broken. From there, things went downhill fast. I wasn't invited to his engagement party. When I asked about it, he said it was just a small thing with friends. Then I saw the photos online, a crowd of 50, champagne, the kind of smiles that erase blood ties. Linda had passed away 2 years earlier from breast cancer. She'd loved Ethan more than air itself. In her final days, she'd said, "Promise me you'll keep peace with him." I promised. But I never promised I'd let him walk over me. So when he didn't invite me to his wedding, something in me shifted, not out of vengeance but clarity. He wanted distance? I'd give him something he'd never forget. Not through shouting. Through presence. Because sometimes the loudest way to be heard is to show up. The wedding was on a Saturday. An outdoor venue by the lake. Elegant. Expensive. I wasn't supposed to know, but small towns have long tongues. An old friend of mine, Bill, who worked catering, mentioned it without realizing. "Ethan Moore, right? Big wedding out by Willow Lake Lodge this weekend. Whole place rented out." I smiled. That's so. That night, I sat in my workshop, the smell of pine and varnish filling the room. I stared at the small wooden box I'd made years ago, the one meant for Ethan's wedding gift. Inside it was a pocket watch, old silver, engraved with our family initials. It had been my father's, then mine. I'd saved it for him. And now it would still be his, just not in the way he expected. I took out a fresh piece of oak and began carving. Not out of anger, but something quieter, purpose. I worked until dawn, shaping each edge, smoothing each surface. It became a small frame, with a photograph of me and Linda holding baby Ethan. Under it, I engraved words. Love doesn't wait for an invitation. By morning, I had a plan. I shaved, put on my old gray suit, polished my shoes, and drove the hour-long road to Willow Lake. The sun was high when I reached the gates. I parked near the tree line and watched guests walking in, suits, dresses, laughter spilling like champagne. I stayed out of sight until the ceremony began. Then, quietly, I followed the path through the back garden. The music had started, violins, soft and gentle. The guests were seated. The bride was about to walk down the aisle. But here's the twist of fate. Rebecca's father had fallen ill that morning. They were scrambling to find someone to walk her down the aisle. Whispers spread among the guests. Then someone said, "We might have to skip that part." That's when I stepped forward. Calm. Steady. With the kind of silence that turns heads. "Excuse me," I said softly to the wedding planner. "I can help." She blinked. "Sir, who?" "I'm the groom's father," I said. Her eyes widened. But before she could speak, Rebecca saw me, her face pale, eyes tight. Ethan froze at the altar, his smile falling away like glass. But the guests were already watching. And no one dared interrupt a man in a suit holding a steady smile. I turned to Rebecca and offered my arm. For a second, she hesitated. Then, under the weight of all those eyes, she took it. Together, we walked down the aisle. Every step echoed like a lifetime. The whispers grew, "That's his father. Didn't he say his dad wasn't coming?" Ethan's face was unreadable. But I didn't look at him. I looked straight ahead, calm as stone. When we reached the altar, I placed Rebecca's hand into Ethan's, and leaned close enough for only him to hear. "Even when you forget me," I whispered, "I still stand behind you." Then I turned, handed the small oak frame to the officiant, and walked away without looking back. The ceremony went on, but the air had changed. People glanced at me as I took a seat at the far back. Some smiled respectfully. Others whispered. Ethan tried to recover, but I saw it, that flicker in his eyes when he realized what had just happened. He'd erased me from his story, and yet, there I was, part of the most photographed moment of his life. When they kissed and the crowd clapped, I simply stood up and left. I didn't wait for dinner or cake. I didn't need to. My presence had done its work. Outside, the wind off the lake was cool. I placed the wooden frame on the gift table, tucked among wrapped boxes and bows. Then I walked to my truck, the crunch of gravel underfoot steady as my heartbeat. That night, I sat on my porch again, whiskey in hand. The stars looked closer than usual, maybe because the silence felt earned. The next morning, there was a knock on my door. It was Ethan. His tie still loose, eyes red. For a second, we just looked at each other. Father and son, two men divided by pride. "Why'd you come?" he asked quietly. I smiled. "Because someone had to walk her down the aisle." His jaw tightened. "You had no right." "No," I said. "But I had love. And love doesn't ask for permission." He stared at me, tears welling up despite himself. "You embarrassed me." I leaned back. "Maybe. But only because you tried to erase where you came from. You can't build a new life by burning the old one." He didn't answer. Just stood there, breathing heavy. Then his eyes caught the photo frame on the table. He picked it up, read the engraving, and his expression softened. "She didn't want you there," he muttered. "She said you'd judge her." "I judged no one," I said calmly. "But I won't let lies rewrite truth." He looked away. "Rebecca doesn't know how to deal with this." "This." I repeated. "Family." He said nothing. Then quietly, "I'm sorry." But apologies, I've learned, are like leaves, light, but they don't fix the roots.
So I just nodded. You'll understand someday.
Maybe when you're a father.
Months passed. We didn't talk much.
But I'd left something in motion, not bitterness but memory. People still talked about that wedding. How the groom's father appeared like a ghost and walked the bride down the aisle. It became a small-town story, not cruel, just haunting. And sometimes, haunting is enough. Then, one afternoon, I received a letter.
From Ethan.
No text, no call, a handwritten letter, like the kind I used to send him when he was in college.
It read, "Dad."
I don't know how to explain it, but that day, when you walked her down the aisle, I felt something I hadn't felt in years.
Shame. But also love.
Rebecca didn't understand it at first. She thought you came to humiliate us.
But when she saw the picture frame, she cried.
We hung it in our living room. I still look at it every morning. I've been thinking a lot about Mom lately. About what she'd say if she saw how far I drifted. I'm sorry for forgetting where I came from. I hope someday you'll forgive me, but I understand if you already have.
Love, Ethan.
I folded the letter, placed it in the same wooden box where the pocket watch rested, and smiled. Forgiveness wasn't something I had to give. It had already happened the moment I walked that aisle. Because revenge, when done right, doesn't destroy, it awakens. Years have passed since that day. Ethan visits now, often with his little daughter. She calls me Grandpa Joe. Sometimes, she runs around the same yard where her father once played. And when I watch her, I see the loop of life, how pride fades and blood remembers. Ethan never brings up that wedding anymore. But sometimes, when we sit together in the quiet, he'll say, "You really walked her down the aisle."
And I just chuckle.
Someone had to keep the story honest. He smiles, a little ashamed, a little grateful. And that's enough for me. You see, revenge doesn't always mean making someone suffer. Sometimes, it means holding a mirror so clean that they see what they've become, and what they've lost. I didn't raise my hand.
I didn't raise my voice.
I just raised my head and walked. And that's the kind of revenge no one forgets. If you asked me today whether I'd do it again, I'd say yes, every step of that aisle was worth it. Not to hurt him, but to remind him. Family isn't something you invite. It's something you carry, whether you admit it or not. Linda would have smiled that day, I think. She'd have said, "You finally taught him without words." And maybe I did. Because sometimes, the strongest love comes wrapped in silence. And the most poetic revenge is grace.